The halls of the Valar Palace stretched wide and tall, carved from stone that glowed with faint silver light. At the heart of the empire sat King Dorvan, ruler of the proud and powerful Valar people. His throne rose above the gathering chamber, where nobles and warriors knelt to him with respect. His voice carried weight, his orders shaped battles, and his gaze alone made even the bravest hesitate. To his people he was strength given form, but to his youngest daughter Lyra, he was a mountain she could never climb. Lyra stood at the edge of the chamber, away from the line of princes and princesses who bore the proud mark of their lineage. Each of her siblings had trained in the art of channeling the radiant energy that flowed through their bodies. That energy gave them power, speed, and strength unlike any other race in the stars. Her elder brother Varen could summon blades of light in his hands. Her elder sister Mara could strike enemies from afar with glowing bursts. Even the youngest of her cousins could call sparks to dance at their fingertips. Lyra, however, had none of it. The radiant energy never obeyed her. When she tried to focus, it slipped away like water through her hands. Where her siblings shone bright, she remained dim. Where they were celebrated, she was pitied. And where they were praised as heirs of strength, she was named a burden. King Dorvan never said the word openly in council, but his eyes told her everything each time he looked past her. He invited her siblings to the war councils, where they stood beside him to hear the strategies of conquest. Lyra was placed at the far wall, silent and unseen. When visiting leaders arrived, Dorvan introduced each of his children with pride, speaking of their talents. When it was Lyra's turn, he would clear his throat, pause, then move on without mention. To the court, Lyra was a shadow. To the people, she was the forgotten princess. And to herself, she was the burden the king carried but never wanted. One morning, as the sons of Valar cast golden light through the tall windows, the great chamber prepared for the arrival of visitors. Soldiers lined the halls in armor, and banners of silver and black draped the walls. Rumor spread quickly that envoys from a distant world had arrived. These envoys were humans, travelers from Earth who sought trade and knowledge. The court whispered about them, for humans were not known for power or weapons. They had no radiant energy, no gifts of light. To many Valar, they were a fragile people who survived only through numbers and tools. Lyra sat quietly near the edge of the chamber as the great doors opened. A small group entered, led by a man with plain clothing and calm steps. His name was Thomas, though Lyra did not know it yet. Unlike the Valar, he carried no glow of energy around his body. He walked with steady movements, his eyes sharp and alert, but there was no trace of power that could impress a warrior court. King Dorvan frowned the moment the human envoy approached the throne. His voice was heavy as he spoke. "So this is the envoy from Earth. I expected more." The nobles chuckled softly, hiding their smiles behind raised hands. The Valar warriors whispered to each other, certain that the meeting would be short. To them, humans were weak and unworthy of standing in such a hall. Yet Thomas did not bow too deeply, nor did he stumble over words. He stood before the throne with respect, but also with calm dignity. "Great King of Valar, I come to bring goodwill from my people. We seek friendship, not conflict, and the exchange of wisdom between our worlds." His voice carried no tremble. His words had no fear. Lyra noticed this first. She had seen many leaders from smaller worlds bend quickly under her father's gaze, but this man spoke evenly, as though he carried his own ground with him wherever he went. The king leaned back, unimpressed. "Wisdom? What wisdom could humans offer? You carry no power, no energy, no strength of body. You rely on machines and tools. Why should the Valar listen?" The words struck like a hammer in the hall. The court waited for the human to falter. Yet Thomas did not. He met the king's gaze and replied calmly, "Because sometimes wisdom is not found in power alone. Sometimes it is found in endurance, in the will to rise even when the world falls heavy." The chamber grew quiet. The Valar warriors frowned at such boldness, but Lyra's heart stirred. She had never heard someone speak such words in the presence of her father. To her, the sentence carried a weight she had longed to hear all her life. As the talks continued, Thomas spoke with steady reason. He did not flinch when the king dismissed him. He did not lose his composure when nobles mocked him. Instead, he answered each question with patience, and when he was silenced, he stood tall without shame. From her place at the edge, Lyra watched. She watched the way he spoke without the glow of power. She watched how he carried himself as though nothing could shake him. She watched how he did not lower his eyes even when her father's glare grew sharp. For the first time in her life, she thought, perhaps strength was not what she had been told. Perhaps it was not only radiant energy or blades of light or bursts of fire. Perhaps it could be something else, something she had not yet understood. Later that day, when the envoys were led to their chambers, Lyra walked through the garden alone. The garden stretched wide behind the palace, filled with tall crystal trees and flowers that glowed softly in the night air. She liked it there because few ever followed her. The garden was quiet, a place where her failure was not so loud. She sat near the fountain, thinking of Thomas. His words played again in her mind. Sometimes wisdom is not found in power alone. She whispered them to herself, as if tasting them. They felt different from anything her father had ever spoken. Footsteps broke her thought. She turned quickly and saw the same human walking the path of the garden. He paused when he noticed her, then bowed politely. "I did not mean to intrude," he said gently. "I was told the gardens were open to guests." "You are not intruding," Lyra answered softly. She stood and looked at him with curiosity. "You speak differently than others in my father's court. You are not afraid." Thomas tilted his head, studying her. "And you watch differently than others in the court. You do not laugh when they laugh. Why is that?" Lyra hesitated. She had never spoken her thoughts aloud to strangers, but something about his steady eyes made her feel safe. "Because they laugh at what they do not understand. They laugh at weakness, and I know how it feels to be called weak." Thomas did not laugh. He did not look away. He only nodded as if he understood. "Then perhaps you are stronger than they think. Sometimes the ones who carry the heaviest words are the ones with the strongest hearts." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her as anything but a burden. For the first time, she felt a spark, not of radiant energy, but of hope. The night sky stretched above them, stars shining across the dark canvas. The fountain sang softly and the flowers glowed faintly at their feet. For the first time in her life, Lyra felt that perhaps she was not alone. And for the first time in the history of the Valar Palace, a human had planted the thought that strength could take many forms. The next day in the palace felt much like the one before, yet something had shifted in Lyra's heart. She walked the long corridors with her head lowered as usual, but her thoughts were not heavy with shame. They were restless. She kept thinking of the human envoy named Thomas. His calm voice, his steady eyes, and his strange way of speaking about strength played in her mind. For years she had been told that power was only radiant energy. Her siblings trained every sunrise, summoning blades of light or striking practice dummies with bursts of fire. Lyra had tried the same, but the energy never obeyed her. She had failed again and again until the king declared she was better kept away from training halls. Yet Thomas had spoken of another kind of strength, one born not from power but from endurance and spirit. When Lyra entered the main chamber, she found the human envoy standing again before the throne. The council gathered around the king, listening as Thomas explained the history of his people. "We humans come from a world with many trials," Thomas said clearly. "Our bodies carry no energy glow, no natural weapons, no strength greater than the beasts of our world. But we learn to adapt. We learn to work together, to build tools, to endure storms, and to rise after every fall. That is how we survive." The council exchanged doubtful glances. A Valar noble whispered, "Survive without power? What kind of life is that?" Thomas heard but did not falter. "It is a life of resilience. And resilience, honored king, is a strength that lasts longer than fire or blade." King Dorvan rested his chin on one hand, unimpressed. "Your words are clever, human. But clever words do not win battles. Tell me, how many worlds has your kind conquered? How many empires have fallen at your feet?" "None," Thomas replied simply. "We do not seek conquest. We seek endurance and growth. We seek to learn and we share what we learn." The king gave a cold laugh. "Then you are farmers and traders, not warriors. Valar blood is forged in war. What place do your people have among us?" Thomas did not lower his gaze. His voice carried quiet strength. "Sometimes the hand that heals is as important as the hand that strikes. Sometimes the one who endures becomes the one who outlasts all enemies." The chamber fell silent. Many in the court frowned, thinking his words soft and useless. But Lyra's heart quickened. She had never heard anyone speak like this before. To her, every word felt like a secret meant only for her ears. When the meeting ended, the nobles left with mocking smiles. Yet Thomas stood firm, calm as ever. As he walked toward the guest corridors, he caught sight of Lyra lingering near the edge of the hall. Their eyes met briefly, and Thomas gave a small nod. It was not the nod of a warrior acknowledging another warrior, but the nod of someone who recognized her presence when no one else did. Later that evening, Lyra found herself wandering again in the garden. The silver leaves of the crystal trees shimmered under the glow of the twin moons. She sat at the fountain, waiting though she did not know why. And soon enough Thomas appeared along the garden path. "You are here again," Thomas said kindly. Lyra lowered her gaze. "I did not expect to see you." "And yet you waited," Thomas answered with a faint smile. He sat near the fountain, leaving respectful space between them. "Tell me, Princess, why does the court look past you when you hold such sharp eyes?" Lyra's chest tightened. She hesitated before speaking, but something in his voice drew the truth from her. "Because I am a failure. I cannot summon radiant energy like my siblings. My father says I am unfit for battle. To him I am nothing but a burden." Thomas listened without interruption. When she finished, he asked, "And do you believe his words?" Her breath caught. I do not know. I have failed so many times." "Perhaps they are true," Thomas shook his head. "Failure is not proof of weakness. Failure is the beginning of learning. Humans fail many times before we succeed. It is how we grow." She looked at him in disbelief. "But you have no radiant energy. How do you stand equal to others without it?" He placed a hand over his chest. "We rely on what we do have. Our minds, our bodies, our will. We train them until they carry us through storms. That is our strength." Lyra studied him closely. His words sounded simple, yet they carried a power she could not ignore. "Are you saying I could be strong even without radiant energy?" Thomas nodded firmly. "Yes, you can be strong in ways your people do not yet understand. You only need to see yourself differently." The thought made her heart race. No one had ever told her she could be more. No one had ever seen her as anything but lacking. Yet this human who her father dismissed as weak spoke to her as if she held hidden strength. For the first time she dared to ask, "Would you teach me?" Thomas raised his brows. "Teach you?" "Yes," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Teach me how humans endure. Teach me how to be strong without radiant energy." He studied her for a long moment. Then he gave a slow nod. "If you are willing to work harder than you ever have, I will teach you. But know this, human strength is not given. It is earned day by day through effort and pain." "I am willing," Lyra whispered, though doubt tugged at her. "Then we begin tomorrow," Thomas said. His voice carried certainty, as if the decision had already been made. The next morning, long before the palace awoke, Lyra slipped quietly into the training court where Thomas waited. The space was hidden behind tall walls used only for visiting envoys. Thomas stood with his cloak set aside, his arms bare, showing the strength of muscles trained not by radiant power but by long discipline. "First lesson," Thomas said, placing a stone weight in her hands. "Strength of body begins with simple work. Carry, lift, and endure." Lyra frowned at the heavy stone but tried. At first her arms shook and the stone slipped to the ground. She felt shame rise in her chest, ready to swallow her. But Thomas only said, "Again." She tried again. Her arms ached. The stone fell once more. "Again," Thomas said firmly. The hours stretched long, but he never mocked her, never called her weak. Each time she dropped the stone, he told her to lift again. Each time her breath burned, he told her to keep moving. And though she failed many times, she realized something strange. He did not see her failure as shame. He saw it as progress. By the end of the day, she managed to carry the stone across the court once without dropping it. She collapsed with exhaustion, but Thomas smiled. "Good, that is the first step." Lyra stared at him in disbelief. "Good? I could barely do it." "Barely is better than not at all," Thomas said. "Tomorrow you will do it again, and the next day again, until one day it will no longer be barely." His words sank into her heart like fire. For the first time, she felt her failure was not an end but a path. That night, as she lay in her chamber, her arms sore and her body weary, she whispered to herself, "Perhaps I am not a burden. Perhaps I can be more." And deep within, a small flame of hope began to grow. The days passed quietly, but in the silence of dawn, when the palace still slept, Lyra and Thomas met in secret. The training court hidden behind tall walls became their world. It was a place where no eyes of the king or court nobles could judge her. In that court, she was not the burdened princess. She was simply a learner, beginning again. Thomas started each morning with the same command: lift, carry, endure. He gave her simple stones, wooden poles, and ropes. The tasks looked small, yet they weighed heavy on her arms and legs. At first, she stumbled often. Her breath came short, and her hands shook until she dropped what she carried. But Thomas never frowned, never mocked, never told her she was unworthy. He only said, "Again." Lyra began to understand that human training was not about showing brilliance at once. It was about repeating, struggling, and rising even after falling. She had always thought strength was gifted, a mark of bloodline. But here, with Thomas, she saw that strength could be built slowly day by day. One morning, as she pushed a heavy block across the court, she asked between gasps, "Why do you not use your tools? Humans are known for machines. Why train like this?" Thomas gave a small smile. "Because tools can be broken or taken away, but the body, the will, and the mind remain. If you train them, no one can steal them." The answer struck her deeply. She thought of her siblings, whose glowing blades and bursts of fire looked powerful. But what if they lost that energy? What if their gift failed them one day? She had always envied their light. Yet now she wondered if her emptiness was not a curse but a chance to build something different. As weeks passed, her body grew stronger. She carried stones farther, lifted poles higher, and struck wooden dummies with fists that no longer trembled. Her arms bore bruises, her palms grew rough, yet she felt a strange pride in every mark. They were proof of effort. Thomas began to teach her not only the body but also the mind. He drew patterns on the ground with a stick, showing her how humans use tactics. "A warrior is not only strong," he said. "A warrior must think. Numbers, ground, timing, all can decide victory more than raw power." He showed her how a smaller force could defeat a larger one by striking from shadows, how patience could turn weakness into strength, and how clever traps could bring down even mighty foes. Lyra listened with wide eyes, absorbing each lesson. No one had ever taught her like this. No one had ever believed she was capable of learning strategy. During one training session, Thomas handed her a wooden staff. "Now you will learn to fight." Lyra gripped the staff nervously. She had never been trusted with a weapon before. Thomas circled her slowly, holding his own staff. "Do not think of me as your teacher now. Think of me as your enemy. Strike." She hesitated, then swung. Thomas blocked easily. Again, she swung harder. He deflected with a twist. Again. She struck again and again, her arms aching, her feet stumbling. Thomas blocked each blow with calm precision. At last, breathless and frustrated, she cried, "I cannot do it." But Thomas lowered his staff and shook his head. "You can. You are learning. Each strike teaches you where you are weak. Each failure teaches you how to adjust. The only way you fail is if you stop." His words lit a fire in her chest. She raised her staff again, this time not with despair but with determination. And though Thomas still blocked her, she no longer felt shame. She felt drive. Nights in the palace remained the same. Her siblings boasted of victories in training halls, their energy glowing bright. The king praised them at feasts, speaking of their greatness. When his gaze fell on Lyra, it was brief, dismissive, as if she were a shadow in the corner. But Lyra no longer shrank from it. She held her secret within her heart. The court saw her as weak, but she knew she was growing. Every bruise on her arm, every sore muscle, every drop of sweat carried proof that she was becoming more. One evening, after a long day of training, she sat by the fountain with Thomas. The moons reflected in the water, casting silver light across his calm face. She asked softly, "Why are you helping me?" "You gain nothing from teaching me." Thomas looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because I saw a spark in you when others saw only a shadow, and because I know what it is to be underestimated. Humans have been called weak many times, yet we endure. I believe you can endure too. And when you endure, you will rise." Her chest filled with warmth at his words. For so long she had been invisible, unworthy in the eyes of her own people. Now here was someone who saw her not as a burden, but as a warrior waiting to emerge. As weeks turned into months, rumors began to drift through the palace. Servants whispered that the burdened princess was acting strangely. Some said she wandered at dawn, others that she hid away in unused courts. Few cared enough to search, for none believed she could be of importance. But the whispers grew louder. One afternoon, as Lyra trained with Thomas in the hidden court, the sound of footsteps echoed beyond the wall. She froze, gripping her staff tightly. Thomas raised a hand for silence. Voices passed by, laughing, then faded away. Still, Lyra's heart raced. What if someone finds out? She whispered. Then they will know you are not what they thought, Thomas said calmly. But remember, strength must sometimes remain hidden until the right moment. Do not fear discovery. Fear only giving up. His words steadied her. She nodded and lifted her staff again. The training continued. Over time, Thomas taught her to use her environment. He showed her how to move silently across stone paths, how to strike from shadows, how to trip a larger foe with clever footing. He taught her to watch closely, to read an enemy's movement before they struck. One day, after hours of practice, Thomas sparred with her under the glowing trees. Lyra's staff moved faster than ever before. She struck left, then right, then feinted low before sweeping upward. For the first time, her staff touched his arm before he blocked. She froze in shock. He smiled. Good. You're no longer striking blindly. You are learning to think while you fight. That is the mark of a warrior. Her heart soared. She had landed a strike against her teacher, the one who had seemed untouchable. It was small, but to her it felt like a victory greater than any praise her father had ever given. That night, lying in her chamber, Lyra whispered to herself, I am not a burden. I am becoming something more. The moonlight spilled across her window and she closed her eyes with a new dream in her heart. She no longer wished to be her siblings. She wished to be herself, strong in her own way, strong as both Valar and as something more. Unseen, the future waited with trials that would test her growth. But for now, she carried the quiet joy of secret progress, of hidden training that was shaping her into what no one had believed possible. And though she did not yet know it, the day would come when the world would see what Thomas had seen from the start, the warrior within her. The peace of the Valar Empire never lasted long. The stars were filled with rivals, and one such rival was the Empire of Dravak. The Dravak were fierce, their ships sharp as blades, their warriors cruel in battle. For years they had tested the borders of Valar space, raiding small colonies and striking trade routes. The king had pushed them back each time with the might of his glowing armies. Yet now the Dravak came in greater numbers than ever before. One morning the skies above Valar burned with fire as enemy ships descended. The alarm spread through the palace like thunder. Bells rang, soldiers rushed to their posts, and the ground shook with the roar of engines overhead. From the tall windows of the great hall, the people saw streaks of light cutting across the heavens as fleets clashed. King Dorvan rose in fury, his voice echoing through the chamber. The Dravak dare strike our world. We will crush them and remind the stars of Valar's strength. His sons and daughters, radiant with power, gathered at his side. Each summoned their glow, filling the hall with shimmering light. Swords of energy formed in their hands. Sparks of fire lit the air, and the court cheered for their champions. Only Lyra stood apart in silence. As always, her father did not call her forward. He gave her no command, no weapon, no place at the front. He turned to her briefly and said coldly, Remain here. Do not leave the palace. You will only slow us down. The words struck deep, though they were nothing new. Yet this time Lyra did not bow her head in shame. She lowered her gaze only to hide the fire in her eyes. For months she had trained in secret with Thomas. For months she had learned to endure, to strike, to think. She was no longer the helpless girl they believed. When the royal army left for the skies, the palace grew strangely quiet. The warriors marched out, banners flying, their glow trailing behind them. The king's voice boomed commands until the chamber emptied. Servants ran in panic, closing doors and securing walls. The sound of distant explosions shook the ground. Lyra remained in her chamber, waiting. She clenched her fists as each boom rattled the floor. She thought of her siblings wielding their radiant powers in the skies, striking enemies with beams of light. She thought of herself, told to stay behind like a fragile ornament. Then the screams began. From the northern wall came the sound of battle, closer than before. The Dravak had broken through the defenses and sent strike teams directly into the palace. Servants fled through the halls, their cries carrying terror. The clash of metal and the roar of intruders echoed closer and closer. Lyra's heart raced. She rose from her seat and gripped the wooden staff Thomas had given her. It was no glowing blade, no weapon of radiant energy, but it was steady in her hands. She whispered to herself, This is my moment. The doors to the palace burst open with a crash. Dravak soldiers stormed through, armored in black steel, their eyes burning with cruel fire. They cut down guards who tried to resist and shouted for the capture of the royal family. Lyra stepped into the hall, her staff raised. Fear gripped her chest, but she remembered Tomas's lessons. Breathe steady. Watch their movements. Strike with purpose. The first Dravak soldier lunged at her, his blade flashing. She sidestepped quickly, letting his weight carry him forward, then struck his knee with her staff. He stumbled, and with a sharp swing she struck his helmet, dropping him to the floor. The other soldiers snarled, surprised that the burdened princess dared stand against them. Two more rushed forward. Lyra moved as Tomas had taught her. She did not meet strength with strength. She moved with speed, tripping one and striking the other's arm until his blade fell. Her heart pounded, her arms ached, but she did not stop. From the shadows of the hall, Tomas appeared, a blade in his hand. His calm eyes met hers, and he gave a firm nod. Hold the line. You are ready. Together they fought through the palace corridors. Dravak soldiers pressed hard, expecting easy victory. But they met the strange style of human training in Lyra's hands. She struck from angles they did not expect, used the walls and pillars to her advantage, and never fought with blind rage. Her strikes were precise, her movements sharp. Tomas fought beside her with steady rhythm, blocking and countering with practiced skill. His presence calmed her fear, guiding her in the chaos. Each time she faltered, his voice rose above the clash. Breathe, focus, strike again. Word spread quickly through the palace. Servants whispered in disbelief that the forgotten princess was standing against the invaders. Guards rallied around her, inspired by the sight. For the first time, her people saw her not as a burden, but as a warrior. The battle grew fierce as the Dravak pushed deeper. Flames licked the walls, smoke filled the corridors, and the sound of war thundered in every corner. Yet Lyra did not waver. Her arms burned, her lungs ached, but her spirit carried her forward. She remembered every lesson, every bruise, every word Tomas had spoken. At last, they reached the central hall where the throne stood. The Dravak commander himself entered, towering above his soldiers, his blade glowing red. His armor bore scars of many battles, and his eyes glared with cruel hunger. So this is the weak princess, the commander sneered. The one they call a burden. I expected nothing, yet I find you standing here. Brave, but foolish. Lyra tightened her grip on the staff. Fear clawed at her, but she pushed it down. I am not what you think I am. The commander laughed and raised his blade high. The strike came fast and heavy, but Lyra moved with practiced steps. She rolled aside, struck his side with her staff, then leapt back before his blade could cut. The crowd of soldiers roared in shock. Tomas called from the side, remember the lesson. Do not meet him head-on. Use his weight, Lyra breathed steady. The commander charged again, his blade swinging wide. She ducked low, swept his leg with her staff, and struck upward into his chest. He staggered, armor cracking. The hall fell silent as the burdened princess held her ground against the mightiest Dravak. With one final strike, she drove her staff into his helmet, sending him crashing to the floor. The enemy soldiers faltered, their leader defeated. Some fled, others dropped their weapons. The hall filled with stunned silence. Guards and servants stared at her with wide eyes. No one spoke until Tomas stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. You see now. You are no burden. You are a warrior. The words washed over her like light. For the first time, she believed them fully. She looked around at the faces of her people, who now gazed at her not with pity but with awe. The hidden training had become revealed in the fire of battle. Soon after, the king and his warriors returned from the skies, their victory secured in the fleet above. Yet when Dorvan entered the palace, he found the throne room littered with defeated Dravak soldiers, and at the center stood the daughter he had dismissed, staff in hand, her chest heaving with strength. The king froze, his eyes narrowing. What is this? A guard stepped forward and bowed. My king, the princess defended the palace when the enemy broke through. She fought with skill and courage. She saved us all. The hall echoed with murmurs. Lyra stood tall, meeting her father's gaze without flinching. For once she did not lower her head. She had nothing to hide. The king said nothing, but his silence carried weight. For the first time, he could not call her a burden. That night, as the fires of battle faded and peace returned, Lyra sat by the fountain once more. Tomas joined her quietly. She looked at him with tired but shining eyes. I did it. I stood as a warrior, Tomas smiled gently. You always had it within you. You only needed to see it. The moons glowed above them, casting silver light across the garden. The war had tested her and she had risen. But the journey was not yet finished. The world had seen a glimpse of her strength, and soon the galaxy itself would know. The morning after the battle was quiet in a way the palace had never known. The stars still shimmered in the sky, but the echoes of war faded slowly. Soldiers cleaned the halls, tending to wounds and repairing doors. Servants moved cautiously, as though afraid the danger might return. Yet in the heart of the palace, the king's chambers remained still. Dorvan sat alone, staring at the glow of the morning light. The events of the previous day weighed on him. His youngest daughter, the one he had called a burden, had stood against the Dravak and held her ground. His strongest sons and daughters had fought in the skies, but it was she, the girl he never trained, who had turned the tide in the palace. His pride wrestled with his humility, and for the first time he questioned his own judgment. Meanwhile, Lyra walked through the palace quietly. Her body ached, her muscles sore from the day before, yet her spirit was stronger than ever. The glow of victory was not in energy or blade, but in the knowledge that she had faced fear and prevailed. Her staff, worn and battered, rested in her hands. She held it as a part of herself now, a symbol of the effort and perseverance that had shaped her. She passed the guards, who bowed respectfully, whispering among themselves. "The princess, the warrior princess." Their words filled the hall with astonishment. Lyra's siblings paused, their glowing weapons lowering slightly as they caught sight of her. They had seen her as weak, unworthy, and insignificant. Now they saw someone entirely different. The king entered the hall slowly. His presence alone silenced the whispers. He stood before Lyra, his eyes searching hers. She did not flinch. She held the staff straight, her back tall. For the first time, the weight of being a burden was gone. She was no longer invisible. Dorvan's voice was quiet, yet it carried authority. "Lyra, you fought the enemy when I forbade you to leave. You faced warriors with no power to aid you and stood firm. How is this possible?" Lyra lowered her staff slightly, keeping her gaze steady. "Father, I learned that strength is not only the glow of energy or the flash of a blade. Strength is in the heart, the mind, and the will to rise when all seems lost." The king's eyes softened as he studied her. His pride had blinded him, his love hidden beneath the weight of expectation. For years he had judged her by what she lacked, not by what she could become. Now he saw clearly. The human Thomas had taught her more than he could have imagined. The one he called weak had become a warrior. Thomas appeared quietly in the hall, standing beside Lyra. He bowed slightly to the king. "Your Majesty, she has always had the strength. She only needed guidance to see it herself." The king nodded slowly. "It seems I have underestimated both my daughter and your people." He turned to Lyra. "You have shown courage beyond your years. You have proven yourself in the heat of battle. From this day forward you will be recognized not as a burden but as a warrior of the Valar." A hush fell over the hall. Lyra's siblings stared in astonishment, and the soldiers bowed deeply. The court whispered among themselves, their previous judgment replaced with awe. Lyra felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had never sought recognition from her father, yet hearing his words now filled her with quiet joy. She had not only fought for herself, but also shown her people that worth could not be measured by power alone. Days passed, and the empire began to heal from the scars of war. Soldiers returned to their posts and trade routes reopened. The king held council meetings with his generals, yet Lyra was no longer hidden at the back of the chamber. She stood among the advisors, her staff resting at her side, offering insights on strategy and defense. Her training with Thomas continued, though now it was no longer hidden. Other young warriors of the court watched, eager to learn from her experience. Lyra taught them what she had learned from humans, the importance of patience, observation, and clever tactics. She showed them how to fight without relying solely on energy, using the mind and body together. Even her siblings began to change. They watched her closely, realizing that strength was not only measured in glowing power but in resilience, courage, and the ability to think quickly. Slowly, they approached her seeking advice, and she welcomed them without pride. Her victories were not for glory alone, but to show others what determination could achieve. One evening, as the moons of Valar rose high in the sky, Lyra walked to the training court. The silver light reflected in the water of the fountain, and the flowers glowed softly around her. Thomas joined her, smiling at the progress she had made. You have grown beyond what I imagined, he said. Not only in skill but in heart, Lyra smiled. I could not have done it without you. You believed in me when no one else did. He shook his head. You believed in yourself. I only helped you see it. The warrior was always inside you. They trained together that night, moving with precision, striking with purpose, and testing the limits of their endurance. Each motion, each lesson, reinforced the bond between human and Valar, teacher and student. And with every swing of her staff, Lyra felt the strength within her grow. News of Lyra's courage spread across the empire. Villagers, traders, and travelers spoke of the princess who had defended the palace with no glowing energy, a warrior born not from birthright but from willpower. Songs were written, stories told, and for the first time the people looked to her as a symbol of hope. The king, once proud and dismissive, watched her quietly from the throne. He no longer saw a burden, he saw the embodiment of perseverance, a living proof that strength was more than what could be seen with the eyes. One afternoon, the king called Lyra to the council chamber. She entered with calm steps, staff in hand. He gestured for her to sit beside him, a position she had never held before. Lyra, he said softly, you have changed more than the palace, more than the army, and more than me. You have shown that even those who are overlooked can rise to greatness. The galaxy will remember your deeds, and I will ensure that your story inspires generations. Lyra bowed her head, humbled. I only did what I had to do. I could not let our people fall. Dorvin smiled faintly, and in doing so you became more than what anyone imagined. Not because of radiant energy, but because of courage, wisdom, and determination. You are truly a warrior of the Valar. The words filled her with a calm pride. She had long wondered if she would ever be seen as more than a burden. Now she knew that true strength was not about birthright or talent alone. It was about heart, persistence, and the will to act even when all seemed lost. In the months that followed, Lyra continued to train and teach. Thomas prepared to return to his world, but not before leaving her with a final lesson. Remember, Lyra, the warrior within you is not a single day's victory. It is every choice to rise, every act of courage, every moment you refuse to surrender. I will remember, Lyra said, her eyes bright. I will carry this strength forward. The human envoy departed, leaving behind a legacy that would change the Valar Empire forever. Lyra stood in the training court, her staff resting at her side, watching the sun rise over the crystal trees. The world was vast, full of challenges, yet she felt ready. She no longer feared being overlooked or underestimated. Her siblings joined her, not as rivals but as comrades, eager to learn from the one they once called weak. Together they trained, laughed, and prepared for the future. And as the moons of Valar rose high in the sky, the burdened princess became the warrior queen of her own destiny. Lyra's journey had begun in silence, in doubt, and in fear. It had passed through sweat, pain, and perseverance. And it ended with the world recognizing what Tomas had seen all along. The warrior within her was real, powerful, and unstoppable. The Empire of Valar would never forget her. The story of the princess who refused to be a burden would be told for generations, a shining example that true strength was not always visible, but it was always present in those who dared to believe in themselves. Lyra lifted her staff high, feeling the weight, feeling the power not of glowing energy but of her own unwavering will. The stars above seemed to shine brighter as though celebrating her triumph. She had faced doubt, fear, and war. And she had risen. She was no longer a burden. She was a warrior,